for being here. Recording, yes, is in progress. Okay. So as you can see, I think for this year's theme, I'm going with a very pink theme because it's a heart full of love, okay, by Clare of Assisi. And please pardon the disco light, right? We're just trying to keep everybody, I think, awake on this Monday night. So this is like adding, a special effect. And God always gives us special effects to enhance our, overall presentation. I'm sure that it is working in our favor today. Okay. So as I try to toggle, oh wait, I need to say, sorry, I need to acknowledge that the meeting is recorded. Oh. Okay, so barring a few interesting things that happen along the way, including the flashing screen, right? So actually, I think delving into this particular chapter, the idea of like poverty really struck me because I think what is our usual understanding of what it means to be poor, right? So I think we use the word a lot, right? And one of the more common understandings, I think, of what it means to be poor is human deprivation, right? Human deprivation, we're deprived of something, right? We are in want of something, right? And I actually wanted to share this like very interesting experience that I had. So I think last year I was actually traveling around in Europe, right, in London, right? And I was in a tube station, right? In a tube station, and a man actually came up to me and said, "Hey, can I have a little bit of change for me so that I can have a hot meal today?" And I think that really struck me, right? Because I think we tend to be very busy, right? We're actually like very concerned with like our own, needs and wants. And sometimes we really forget about the human need that is actually present in front of us and through this man, right? So I think for me, that's definitely a very real glimpse of what poverty is, right? Human deprivation. And a lot of the time, that's what we think poverty is, right? So I think Ilia Delio in the first part of chapter 2 is talking all about that, right? About what we don't have or what people don't have, right? So it's always operating from this area of like what we don't have and what we need, right? So I wanted to reflect actually on 3 ideas that actually Ilia Delio talks about in her book. So we think of poverty as human deprivation, of lacking something. But here I have a very interesting sketch of Jesus, who is holding very tenderly the 99 sheep, maybe, right? Okay, over here. And he's holding this lamb so tenderly. And that reminds me, I think, of the love that God has for us. So we're going to go deeper into this nature of what we mean by the poverty of God. Because chapter 2 is about the poverty, right, of the human heart so as well. So what does that mean? And she talks about 3 aspects of love. And you would realize that actually the word love here is capitalized, right? Usually we'll have it, right, just as a lowercase, right, love, right? I love you, you love me, right? But here we're talking about the source of love itself, which is God, right? And she talks about 3 distinct aspects. So if you find that anything kind of like speaks to you, right, like to write something down along the way, please do. There's going to be a lot of wisdom coming out in this presentation from all of our Franciscan saints. Okay, so you will have little images of them. This is me and my teaching pedagogy images in various points, and I always stick to 3 points on the slide. Okay, so the first point is the love that brings us into being. So we can just reflect about it. What do you mean by the love that brings us into being? Think about like Genesis, right? The fact that God loved, right, this world and decided to create us, but he didn't have to, but he decided to create us out of love and for love. So firstly, already from the first get-go, is the love that brings us into being, into our very existence, okay? And then number 2, the love that sustains us. When we think about what keeps us going, we think about the people that care about us, right? People that check in with us. That is the thing that sustains us. But here we're talking about the love of God, right? That sustains us in our difficult times. And the third aspect, which I think really touches me a lot, is the love that yearns for us, that desires us, right? That wants to be with us in a very close, right, and intimate way, to know us, right, true and true, the love that yearns for us. So we're going to delve deeper, I think, into these 3 aspects, right, of God's love, okay, as we go into this chapter. So before I go deeper into the chapter, there was this part of the chapter which I found very interesting. So I was trying to like actually pronounce this guy's name. I think it's Ramon, And is it Lau? I think so. There's just too many L's in his surname.
I think the whole L is Y.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Rajan. Yes.
Spanish.
Yeah, Spanish. A Spanish mystic. Right, Ramon. So I'm just going to call him Ramon for now. And there's this part of the book which I found very interesting that Ilia Delio actually mentions. So I think you will find a pattern here as I go further into the slides. So what is Ramon asking? Right? Ramon is asking the lover, where are you from? From love. Okay, so I think we already know what's going to be the next question or the next answer. What are you made of? Love. Right. I don't know whether we are sensing a pattern here, right? Or we think that something, interesting is going to happen in the next few slides. Who raised you? Love. With a capital L, by the way. Right? Who raised you?
Not very big vocabulary.
Not very big vocabulary, this Ramon. I think all the answers to his questions are all the same. Singular answer to all his questions. Who do you live on? Right? What do you live on? Love also as well. Where are you going to love? And I found this is like the most interesting question, like where is your direction, right? You're going back to the source of love. So yes, Ramon's vocabulary is unfortunately a bit limited, right? But I think he's actually centering himself on a very essential truth, right, that we are looking at today. So what does Clare tell us, right? So I think we need to bring St. Clare, who's a really cool lady. Okay, if we actually read a little bit about her history, so she was like a noble woman. I think just like yesterday, Friday, I was saying about how she can live in this like very rich area in Assisi, but she's like, no, this is not my life. I don't want to live this life. And she actually lived a life of a lot of spiritual poverty and actual physical poverty. So what she tells us is that we center ourselves in the love of God by becoming poor. And this poverty, as we know, is not about that idea of human deprivation. Because that's our common understanding, to be deprived of something, right? To be in need or want. That's why, right, I'm considered poor. But she says that we center ourselves in the love of God by becoming poor, and that's the poverty of God, right? We center ourselves in the love of God by becoming poor, and this is what we're going to go deeper into. So before I go into that idea of what this poverty of God idea is about, I just wanted to first take a little bit of a step back, right, in terms of our common understanding of what poverty is, because this is where maybe we feel a bit more familiar and we kind of understand it a little bit better. And that's the contrast between poverty versus capitalism. Right? So we live in a capitalist society, right? It's all fueled by consumption. I'm an econs teacher, so I really like to talk about consumption and investment and things like that. Okay, and the economy. So the economy runs right on a capitalist sort of like mindset. Right? And unfortunately, that's also us, right? We're consuming a lot, we're buying a lot of things. I'm always looking at what's happening at the next sale, 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, right? There's lots of interesting products out there, right? So capitalism drives our economy. But when Clare, right, and through that way, I guess Ilia Delio, the writer also, she talks about this idea of being poor as being dependent. Think about it. Right, the person that I encountered at the tube station, he was dependent on me for his next meal, right? If I had just walked along, maybe he wouldn't be able to get a hot meal, right, that day. So to be poor means to be dependent on others. But is that something that we like to do? Unfortunately, not really, right? We are mostly like quite, self-reliant. We're quite independent. We don't like to be dependent on other people. So it's not a natural mindset. It's not something that we naturally want to find ourselves in this sort of situation. So what does our good friends, the two Franciscan saints over here. So as you can see, I like a lot of black and white images that I procure from Canva, right? They kind of give a semblance of the saint, but you know that they're going to come up again somewhere in the presentation. So, I might want to test you, and say who is St. Francis, who is St. Bonaventure, right? But maybe later, test you. So just think about which one you think is St. Francis, which one is St. Bonaventure. There's only two saints on this slide. So only two saints on this slide, and I think we know. Yeah, they use some intelligent, educated guess which one is St. Francis, which one is St. Bonaventure. But barring this identification exercise, right? So what is this very important things that the both of them are saying? Right. So they say that Christ live dependent on others, which is mirroring an idea of poverty, to be dependent on others, so that God's goodness could be revealed. I find that quite an interesting thought, right? Dependence, right, allows God's goodness to be revealed. And how does that exactly happen? So of course, later again, I'll ask you who is St. Francis, who is St. Bonaventure. Don't tell me you don't know who is St. Clare. Okay, when I show a picture of St. Clare and you tell me it's St. Francis or St. Bonaventure, I'm going to be like,
She's without beard.
she's without a beard. Yes, right. Thank you so much, right, JP? That's right. We need to have this kind of classroom exercise. Okay. Okay. So this particular sentence, I think really struck me when I read it in the chapter. When we allow others to do things for us, God's goodness shines through them. So think about it as people who prefer to do a lot of things on our own, right? We actually obstruct ourselves, right, from allowing God's goodness to be revealed. When I allow someone to do something for me, even though I know I can do this thing myself, right? I allow God's goodness to shine through that person, right? That person helps me, right? That person gives me some assistance. I allow God's goodness to shine through these people. And I think this is an important gateway, because unfortunately, if not, we'll really be obstructed. There will be some sort of obstruction, okay? We must allow others to do things for us, and that's where God's goodness, I think, shines very brightly. So this is a central idea, and I think this is where we're heading to, right? So pardon all of the strange clouds and other design elements that I've added to the slide. As you can see, this is my design aesthetic. Pink, this sort of font, some various images, okay? But I think this is the point that I want to bring everybody to, which is that poverty is not about deprivation. It's not about wanting or needing something, but it's actually innately about relationship, relating to other people. When you think about it, you help someone, that is human relationship, right? You're building a connection with that person. It's not about the fact that they need that money from you to have the meal. It's about the fact that you see that person as another human person. You see them, right, as Christ, right, asking that, will you help me, right? Will you share your cloak with me? That is the human interaction, that human connection, and that's the idea of relationship. So I'm gonna put again 3 points, right? I would say 3 points and then got sub points, that's how I go, 3 and then a few more points on the slide, right? And I just wanted to just stay here for a while and then just let us read through this slide, and also as I kind of go through a few of these ideas. So where we like to dwell is from a place of strength, a place of surety and certainty. But poverty impels us to reflect on our lives from a position of weakness, right? We don't like to be weak, unfortunately, right? Because we like to have control of the situation. We like to come from a higher position, right? To see, how life is going. But what poverty kind of motivates us to do is actually more of the second point. It doesn't mean that we're emptying our pockets of money per se, because that would be an idea of need and want, right? I'm just emptying my pockets, I'm helping all these people. But maybe we are also emptying 3 things that we are not so clearly aware of: our hearts, our minds, and our wills. If all these things are very full, we have no time, we have no space for a relationship with God, right? Our hearts are full, right, of maybe, let's say, envy, for example, right? Our wills are unfortunately ordered to some other desires, right? Our minds, right, are full of all sorts of, negative thoughts, right? We don't have space, right? And these are the things that we store up, right? We store all of these things in our hearts, our minds, and wills. It becomes a very crowded space, right? And when it becomes too crowded, we begin to isolate, right? We no longer have space for people, right, in our lives. We no longer have space to bring them right into our common space. And that's when we start to isolate ourselves from real relationship with others, because that's what poverty is about. Poverty is not about, right, the fact that I need money, I need resources. It's the fact that I may be poor in my spirit, right? Also, so I may be deprived in other ways. I may be depriving myself of developing real relationship with other people. And that's because 1, 2, 3, hearts, mind, and will is too full, right? And it's a really big and central idea, I think, in a lot of Franciscan spirituality, the idea of that you have to empty yourself in order to really encounter God, really to develop a relationship with Him and to other people also as well, right? So maybe I'll just let the slide flash for a while, and give you a little bit of bolts, right? Because I feel like that's always good, right? So yes, it's a disco today. It's a spiritual disco that we are at today, right? We're going to lean into the spiritual disco, okay, and allow, right, the spirit to speak to us, okay? But I think if you find that there's any point that is relevant, right, or that you'd like to reflect a little bit more about it, yeah, please just do take it down. I try to put shorter sentences because I know that, students cannot read too much. And I like specific fonts and colors. Okay, so things are some interesting ideas, right, about poverty that we might already have, right? We have not thought about. Maybe it's a new facet we would like to explore. Okay, and I think if we are okay and getting a little bit of a headache from the disco, I will be moving to the next idea. Okay, so another thing I love is windows, right? Windows, wide open windows. If this was an art lecture, I'll talk about like Edward Hopper maybe, but maybe not today. So it's a window over here, a really nice aesthetic window that adds itself into the entire slide. Okay, so I really like, complementary, elements in the slide. And what poverty calls us to be is these four very interesting things, right? Poverty calls us to be open. That's what the window is representing. You need to have two directions, right? Okay, to be open. To be open to what? To open what's outside the window, right? This is representing our interior self. What you're looking at outside, you need to be open, right? And poverty allows us to do that. Poverty also allows us to be receptive, right? Our hands are open, the window is open. You're able to receive help from other people. If not, we say, oh no, I can do all these things myself. I don't need these people to help me, right? And then for example, like even today, like Gwen and Ben are like, oh yeah, I can just set up this thing myself. But I say, no, I'm gonna let Gwen and Ben do their magical things, right? I'm just gonna stand here and try my best to remember what I use. Okay? So I feel this is like a daily exercise, in your spiritual, spiritual growth, I feel. Okay? So to be open to receptive, and I like the last 2 points as well, because it's not only about openness and receptivity, because that's our disposition. It's about allowing others into our lives to step into our lives. You close the door, you close the window, how are people going to come in? They'll be like knocking like 10 times, so I kind of come inside. Now the window is open. You allow other people into your life, right? So you allow other people to help you, allow other people to build a relationship with you. I think that's a very beautiful thing. And lastly, you don't just stay inside, right, your window. Now you are free to enter into the lives of others as well. And that's how you build relationships, right, with others. So the first 2 points lead to the last 2 points. Okay, openness, receptivity, the disposition, and therefore this is like the outcome, right? Allowing other people to help you and allowing yourself to be attuned to the needs of other people. Like sometimes we might want to help other people, but we just stay in our little space, right? We're like, oh yeah, I think this person needs some help, but I don't know whether I want to reach out. But I feel very paiseh, tell the person, hey, do you need this help, or something like that. Because we feel like, oh, people are going to judge me, people think I'm so capable, why am I so concerned about these kind of things? Well, it's okay, God likes us to be capable. It's like, just continue being capable. Continue asking your friend, even though the person's like, can you stop asking me? Just keep asking. It's okay, right? It's okay, right? We can talk about that later, yes. So I think this is a very interesting point. And here we go. Don't tell me you don't know who this is. Don't say things like St. Francis and Bonaventure at this point. Okay, this. Yes, that's right. That's correct. That's another trick question. Yeah, that was a trick question. Is there only one thing away? Is there something more important happening in this life? Yeah, the moment for yes. So this is St. Clare. Yeah, this is a trick question. Very well timed trick question. So St. Clare is over here. Okay. St. Clare is holding the monstrance, right? Very popularized. So she actually held the monstrance, I think, in one of those stories that we know about her, right? She warded off the invading army. And yes, thank you for GP. Very important. Right? Jesus is inside the monstrance. So St. Clare did talk a lot about this idea of gazing upon Christ. So this idea of contemplation, right? So it's very strong in the Franciscan spirituality to contemplate. To contemplate what? To look, right, upon Christ. Right? So contemplation. So St. Clare is very big on this idea of contemplation. So how do we get from poverty to contemplation? So now it's a bit of a big jump. We suddenly was talking about, the idea of the window, openness, receptivity. So now how are we going to link our way to contemplation? So we need to think about it. Now we're drawing a mental mind map. Take out your paper, your pencil, and do some mind maps, okay? So we've got to map the concept so that we understand how it looks like in the broader scheme of things. So Clare is telling us some important things here, and whenever Clare tells us things, there's always going to be one cloud and some random pink element on the left-hand side. So I try to give visual cues to slides. Okay. So what is Clare telling us? Clare tells us that the spiritually poor person, not the materially poor person, we've moved past that idea, okay, of deprivation, is the one who is free to contemplate the presence of God. And we need to sit down with this sentence for a while. Why is it that the spiritually poor person is the one who is free to contemplate the presence of God? Remember that slide, the 3 points? If our hearts, minds, and wills are just too cluttered with other things, we isolate ourselves and we are not free to contemplate the presence of God. Right? If our hearts, minds, and wills are just, taken up with our own desires, our own wants, we are not going to be free to contemplate the presence of God. We don't have space for God, basically, inside our hearts, right? So we need to be spiritually poor, and that's where we're going to. We're going away from that idea of physical poverty and deprivation to spiritual poverty. What does it mean to be poor in spirit, right? To be spiritually poor. So St. Clare is telling us some really, important stuff over here, okay? And I found this an interesting tangent that Ilia Delio goes into, right, for this chapter, when she says that becoming poor is not contrary, but the fulfillment of our human nature. We always think we need a lot of things, right? That we want more and more and more, right? Accumulate. But becoming poor is not contrary, but the fulfillment of our human nature, which means it's aligned, right? It's actually aligned to our human nature. Becoming poor is not, it's quite a big idea, right? We need to think about it. We need to go deeper into it. I just wanted to put it out here on this very nice background grid paper, which I find quite interesting. Yes, right, it's all, aesthetics there, right? It's white up. Okay. Becoming poor is not contrary, but the fulfillment of our human nature. So just keep this thought in our minds, okay, as we go a little bit deeper. And what does Christ reveal to us? Christ reveals to us that the human person is actually poor by nature. We come into this world actually with nothing. Right? Everything that we do have is given to us by God. It's a gift. Right? Everything that we add on, and unfortunately, our whole life is about adding on things. Become heavier and heavier and heavier. We take on more and more burdens. Actually, like the Lord is like, why are you taking on all this other stuff that you don't need? You only need me. And here you are, adding all these things, crowding up your heart, your mind's wills, got like no real estate space for him, right? Basically, right? We are actually by nature poor, right? We have come into this world with about nothing, and we are actually living through Lent right now, right? From ash we come, to ash we will return, right? And I think we need to have that thought in mind, right? At the back of our minds, that no matter how much things that we are trying to accumulate or whatever we are trying to pursue in this life, at the end of the day, we're all going back to him, right? We're going back to the start again. So we are poor by nature, and that is also the condition in which we will return, right, to him, right? So unfortunately, on the other hand, we're just trying to accumulate a lot of things, unnecessary things along the way. So what are we doing? Okay, this is like a really nice picture of two hands. It's because I can't really paint or draw hands, so I like to just look at these kind of pictures. Okay, but unfortunately, a lot of our lives is about grabbing, and grasping. And where does this grabbing and grasping come from? Coming from a sense of fear, right? Like, oh, I need to grab something. If not, I'm not going to get it. It's like not even about going to the sale, and thinking if people are going to grab the skirt or something. So that's like grabbing and grasping. It's about thinking that, hey, I think God actually doesn't really have good plans for me. I need to grab and grasp so that I can accumulate everything right over here, right? And build a really big tower. We feel like I need to keep grabbing, I need to keep grasping because I don't know, whether or not I'm going to get this in future, whether I'm going to have this experience in future. I need to keep grabbing and grasping. And that comes from a place of fear. It gives us a lot of anxiety and it steals away our inner peace. Like, why are we grabbing and grasping? Because we are struggling with trust. If we trust and we say, yes, whatever you give to me today, whatever experience I lived through today, it is all part of your will. I don't need to grab and grasp. I just exist. Right? I just am here right now in this moment. Right? So we grab and we grasp, and that's a lot of the way, unfortunately, that we deal with things, right? So we grab and we grasp, when in actual fact, you might want to think what's the link between the sentence and this particular image on the right, but it's hanging. I'm hanging my tote bag.
I thought it was a shopping bag.
It's a shopping bag. Yes, it is a shopping bag, but it's an environmentally sustainable. So it's okay. Everything is great. Yes, everything is great because it's reused many times. Okay. So in actual fact, our lives represented by the tote bag, hang on the threads of God's gracious love. Right? God is just so generous, right? He wants to give us so much grace, right? So much love. And that is what our lives hang upon, right? Not the fact that we need to grab and grasp and always try to accumulate, something, or, have this experience that we, really, really deeply desire or want. It actually hangs a lot on God's love, which is the centrality, right, of this idea. This entire poverty is rooted, right, in God's love, right? That's all you need. You only need me, right? That's what he's trying to say, right? Barring the black tote bag. Yes, that's true. It is a shopping bag for IJP. Yeah, I do have one too. Right. So hanging on the threads of God's gracious love. Okay, so now unfortunately a little bit more text, very sorry, right? I have to have a few more words on this slide, but I think we should stay on this slide for a while. Okay. Because now what I was trying to say, I think previously, is that our actual human condition is poor to begin with. But how do we know and how do we recognize that poverty? It is a recognition of one's finiteness, right? This is it. This is all that I am. When one grasps the iffiness of one's existence, I didn't have to be here. God didn't have to put me here, right? I didn't have to come into this world. He chose to do so consciously. He wanted me to be here. When I grasp that the iffiness means it could have happened, it could not have happened, right? There's that sense of uncertainty. Then comes the shocking fact that the source and foundation of one's being is not in oneself, like I will myself into being, right? To allow me to be here, right? God's gracious love allowed me to be here. Then I realized that I'm actually truly poor. I don't really have anything, right, to call my own, right? Even my own existence was willed into being, right? By the first slide, remember? The love that wills us into being. He willed us into being. He sustains us and he yearns for us, right? So I think when this sort of idea starts to sink in, we realize that we really are operating from this area of poverty, right? The fact that we are finite, the fact that we are here because of God's gracious love allows us to recognize that we really, truly are poor, right? And not even talking about the physical sense, we're talking about the fact that we are here is due to God's generosity, His generous love. Okay, so that is quite shocking, I think, also when I read this part of the chapter. And that leads me to this slide. So now we accept that we as people are poor, and our inherent condition is poverty. That leads us to a very natural next concept or next idea, dependence, which was talked about in the front part, right, of the slide. I'm radically dependent, and I like the word radical for a few reasons. But the fact that, wow, I really cannot, rely on myself. I have to be completely, fully dependent on who? On another, which we don't like to do, right? We don't like to be dependent on other people. Say, oh yeah, I'm gonna catch all these people, right? I'm gonna ask them for help. Right? Why do I want to, disturb all these people? But no, we should, right? If we really need help in a situation, ask for help. Sometimes it's even hard to ask for help. So we're radically dependent on other people. We're definitely radically dependent on God, the one who willed us into existence. We are radically dependent on God and fleshed in other people, which I find interesting. We see God in other people in the way that they interact with us, in the way that they build human relationship with us, right? The fact that they are fellow pilgrims, right, on this journey, right, also struggling. And finally, we are radically dependent on creation, which is a very Franciscan idea, right? Radically dependent on the world around me, right? So St. Francis is always like pictured with birds, right? Hanging around him. He encounters wolves, right? He encounters a lot of wild animals, but they are his friends. Maybe not to us. Sometimes you're like, the wolves are coming. But it's like, this is my brother wolf, and he talks about the moon and the stars, and I think that's very beautiful to be radically dependent on the world around you, right? Right. And I think this is something that we can actually kind of reflect a little bit deeper on. Like, where are we right now in our journey? Do we feel radically dependent, right, on God, or are we still struggling to get to that point? And that's fine, right? It's an entire continuum, right? The spiritual journey is one big, long line, right? We don't have to be there today, right? But maybe it might give us a little bit of inkling about where do we want to see ourselves, right? Maybe in this land might be a good time for us to think about it. So, enough of the ideas. Now this part of the lesson is about actionable. How do I begin a life of poverty? So I know that I am a poor person, right? Radically dependent on God. So how do I start this journey of poverty? Bonaventure. So don't worry, I didn't put Bonaventure's picture here. I just put Bonaventure's wisdom, okay, on the slide. Bonaventure tells us that no one rightly knows himself until he recognizes his own nothingness. Because we tend to think of ourselves sometimes in a more positive, like positive terms, I'm really good at this, I've got all these other things, going on and all that stuff. But we don't really truly know ourselves until we recognize our inherent nothingness. We are actually nothing without God, right? All that we do and all that we create, the fact that we are here, right, is through God's grace, right? God's grace brought us here today. God's grace has allowed the Wi-Fi to work, right? God's grace has allowed the screen to flash intermittently to provide the spiritual disco atmosphere that we need. Yeah, right? So God, it's all of these things are actually all God's grace. Sometimes we struggle to see it. I could have thought like, wow, this one's going to give me a headache, man. Like every time I look at the slide, I thought like flashing lights. Oh, maybe there's a flashing lights that God is trying to invite me into the slide. Maybe you never know. So it's how we look at it. Actually, really, I think it's about perspective. Yeah, that's right. Oh, it's still. I think 5JP is being taken in by the spiritual disco. Yeah, the BG. Oh, staying alive. Yes, that's true. That's right. Staying alive. You can have karaoke session another time. Yeah, we can use the karaoke set for Friday. So no one rightly knows himself. Yeah, that's why we must stay alive. We're trying our best to stay alive. Okay. So this leads me to this idea. Okay, and I've got a nice picture of the galaxy. Actually, interestingly, right, like Ilia Delio, in the book, if you read a bit about her history, right, and her background, she actually studies a lot about the galaxy, the cosmos, right? And we might think, hey, there's a lot of competing ideas between science, right, and religion, but she's a deeply Franciscan person. She identifies very strongly with Franciscan spirituality, and she also is able to draw on her knowledge and her background, right, in this study of cosmology, for example. She talks about this idea, and I feel like I'm going to butcher the explanations. I'm just going to say the first three words, okay, which is creatio ex nihilo. I hope that I'm not saying it badly, but I'm just gonna skip over and talk about what it is right now. Okay, which is that the universe has no intrinsic ground for existence. And I was like, wow, this is a big idea, man. The universe has no intrinsic ground, it doesn't have to be there. Right? It didn't have to be there in the first place. So if it didn't have to be there in the first place, where did it come from? The source is, it was a free gift of God's overflowing love. God loved us into existence, right? Us as in all of us, right? As people. And he also loved the entire universe into existence, right? He decided to create this world, right? And then he created us also as well to dwell in this world. And I found that, wow, this is like a quite big thought, and not just the fact that, this is a very nice picture of the galaxy. But I realized that, even science, in all these developments, we're continuously like discovering new things. You may think that we're at the end, right, of this scientific road, we've finished all of our technological innovation, but there's so much more that we don't know. We're only scratching the surface. Okay? We're actually discovering more and more about the world that we live in, and that's through God's overflowing love. It's God's design, right? God has already designed, right, this world. It's just that we are slowly discovering more of its complexity, right, and its beauty. And I find that Delio is very good at explaining that in this part. So this one, please don't say it's St. Bonaventure. Okay, but this is St. Francis. Okay, so what it said now, St. Francis is enlarged. By the way, he doesn't have to share the slide. St. Bonaventure. Okay, well, St. Francis, as we know, and I think we've probably read a lot of stories about St. Francis, he calls all creatures brother or sister, which is like, what? Like, what's he talking about, right? So he recognizes everything, right? Creation, right? His fellow brothers and sisters. He recognizes the animals, the sun, the moon as his brothers and sisters. And I find that the words in italics also very interesting, where he says that to be poor is to renounce the instinct of power to the dominion over other things. We always want to be, right, this dominant kind of like force, right? Like, you rule over, right, all of the created world, right? We rule over, right, all of these other beings. We have this instinct of power, of wanting to amass more power, right, over other things, other people, and to be dominion, right? But St. Francis upends this entire scale. But he doesn't say that I am superior to, the birds, right? And all of these other, living creatures. He said that you and me, we are the same level, right? And that's a very Franciscan idea, right? We are all brothers and sisters, including the created world, right? And yeah, and dogs and cats also as well, right? Okay, so I just had to put in the dogs and cats part, because I saw Jerry and I thought about Jerry's dog. Yeah, so dogs and cats are also our brothers and sisters. Okay, we needed to give St. Bonaventure a slide by himself because he was sharing too much space. St. Francis on some previous slide. And St. Bonaventure, right, notes that, now we're going to go a little bit to this idea of the root of sin. Occurs when humans choose to love their own good. Our own good mean, we prioritize our own human needs and wants, rather than receive. We actually heard this word before, right? Receptiveness. Right? We're supposed to receive the goods of the divine giver. He wants to give us so much, right? Gifts, right? He wants to give us so many things. But unfortunately, sometimes we close the window. Like the window is closed, and therefore there's no channel, there's no connection anymore between us and the divine giver. And what did we say previously when we had those images of the hands? We grab and we grasp. We think, oh, God is denying me, something right now in this season. God is not bringing me to where I want to be at this point. But has that caused us to grab and grasp and no longer have that disposition of receptivity? We don't know what it could be. And that's the idea of gift, right? Sometimes it's like the gift is wrapped up. We don't know what is under the wrapping paper until we open it up. Right? Because we have the preconceived notion like, oh, you're gonna give me AirPods, man, for Christmas. Then you open up and you're like, a book? And kind of thing, like that's like totally different things, right? So it's like, when he's like, God's like, maybe you need the spiritual book. Maybe you don't need the AirPods for this Christmas. It's like, God's trying to send you a message, right? You don't need this. And after it's like, oh, disappointment on my dear child's face. It's okay, right? He will move past the disappointment and he'll realize that this is the more important thing that he needs. right now. Yeah, so I thought that was quite interesting idea. You don't know what the gift is until you open the gift. So what is sin characterized by? Unfortunately, all of the things that we sometimes like to do, we're struggling with most of the time. Grasping, right? Grasping comes from a spirit of fear, right? Grabbing, thinking like, if I don't grab the thing now, then it's all going to run out, right? The shelf will be empty, unfortunately, at the end of the sales season, right? No, we're grabbing, we're grasping, and unfortunately, sometimes also self-exalting. And it may not be in a very overt way. Might not be going around saying like, wow, look at how many followers I have. Sometimes it's just a very subversive kind of way of trying to say, hey, I'm a little bit better than you, look at me where I am right now in my life. It's just a very subtle thing. It may not even be a very overt display, right, of this. But this is what characterizes sin. And unfortunately, all of us, right, we are struggling with this daily. So wait, does it mean that nothing belongs to me? Because it's like, hey, we're spiritually poor, we have nothing, this sounds like a really scary world. Does it mean I don't own, this pair of shoes? I don't own my Apple Watch. Like, oh my goodness, like my ideas have completely been upended. And this brought me to this part of the chapter, right, where Delio actually puts this to rest. He said that ownership may be legal, right? I own this car, right? I own this, object, maybe, for example. But possessiveness, right? We can own something, definitely, right? We can own an object, we can own the car, right? We can own some other physical object. But possessiveness is a value and attitude, and this is possessiveness, right? Possessiveness, like clinging on, to this particular thing, thinking that this thing is going to disappear, right, or go away. So possessiveness is the issue here. Not so much the fact that we own this thing or that we legally own this thing. It's about the fact that we have this attitude of possessiveness, right? Thinking that, like, God, don't take this away from me, right? Why are you, trying to take it away from me? But he's saying that I don't want you to be possessive. I want you to be open and to be receptive, right? Why do you not trust me, right? Why do you not trust my providence? There must be something going on here, right? That we need to think about a bit more deeply. And we do live our lives with a deep sense of possessiveness over the things and people, right? For example, in our lives. But when we do that, we suffocate, right? It's a very lack of, airflow, unfortunately, right? And we're not able to live and love in a very free way. So this is the crux, I think, of this chapter, which is that I'll need to accumulate, right? So we're trying to amass, we're trying to get more things, and possess, which was the previous slide, right? That means you already have the thing, and now you're like, oh, I'm really possessive of it, right? I don't want people to take it away from me. Then we feel very possessive. It could even be like, oh, someone's going to take my water bottle away, or something like that. And I love this like water bottle or something. Yeah, right? Maybe I own it, but possessive is like, oh, let's say Tabs said, oh, can I go and take a look at the water bottle? And I'm like, hey, Tabs, cannot lah. This is my water bottle. That's possessiveness, right? If I'm not possessive, yes, Tabs, look at the water bottle. If you want to take it, take the water bottle away from me. That's the ideal. Obviously, that's the ideal scenario, right? Like, you really like the water, right? Right? Well, like, don't take it away from me. That's mine. That's mine. When we say things like that's mine, possessivity, right? If we actually think that, oh, this person may benefit from having this thing, right? Like that we own. Yeah, just let them have it, but it's difficult. We struggle with it all the time. And because we cling and all these things happen, it separates us from other people, right? It separates us from other people, and we lose our sense of relatedness, right? For example, let's say really, somebody wants this particular item, or whatever. It allows us to develop that sense of connection. Like, hey, why do you want the item? We start having a conversation. There is some relatedness. But when we accumulate, when we possess, we live very isolated lives, right? It's just about me, my immediate needs, and wherever I am right now. So I think this is a central idea in the book and in chapter 2, particularly about the idea of poverty is not about need and want, but it's about relationship, right? Relationship.
This reminds me of my novice master 39 years ago.
39.
2 words destroy fraternity.
What's that?
Mine and thine.
Mine and thine. Okay.
Mine and yours.
Mine and yours. Okay, so everyone in Zoom, if you didn't listen and didn't hear that part, mine and thine are the 2 destroyers of fraternity, right? So hashtag words of Fry JP. Okay, so just need to tell everybody in the Zoom call so that we are not losing the wisdom that's coming out here. So we must make sure that the Zoom, later I will test people about the key ideas that we presented. Okay, so what is this human desire? Now, human desire, right, is for power, right? We want to, have power, dominion. And unfortunately, it is a sin against the one in capital O, who is the perfect image of God and is equal to God. He's trying to give us so much, right? And what are we trying to do? Accumulate, right? Cling, possess, completely against our human nature, which is support, right? We're trying to get all these unnecessary things on ourselves. And it's a sin. It's a sin that we are all struggling with every day in our own individual ways. Right? It's a sin against the one who is trying to give us so much, the perfect image of God, who is equal to God. Right? And it's a daily struggle. I think we just need to acknowledge it. Right? It's okay. I think it's okay to struggle. Right? But I think we just need to be aware of it, right? And know where we are, okay, right now. Okay, so this one is quite deep. This one is quite the deep thought. So the Son of God, right, represented here by this cross, we are going through length, accepts the poverty of human condition. I'm sure we have heard that Bible verse, right, before about, how he came, right, to assume our human condition. I think we even hear it sometime around Good Friday, right? Like sometimes during the Good Friday service, how he came to assume our very lowly, right, poor human condition, to be with us, to understand intimately what it means to be human, right, to go through our struggles. And the Son of God accepts the poverty, doesn't resist it, he accepts it, right? He's humble, right, enough to accept that this is the poverty of our human condition. We have nothing, right? We came from nothing. Actually, that's the creatio ex nihilo, right? We came from nothing. We only came from his overflowing love, right? And that may be something that we might want to reflect also, I think, in this season of Lent. To show what? To show us that equality with God is not something to grasp, which is what we've always been trying. We're trying to be the same, right? I think first Sunday of Lent, with Adam and Eve, trying to get ahead, right, of themselves, and then being, unfortunately, stopped in their tracks. Okay, so we want to be the same as God. We want to be smarter. We want to, be a few steps ahead. But unfortunately, we have to admit and acknowledge where we are, right? That equality of God is not something to grasp, right? We're not grasping, we're not trying to grab something that is not inherently ours. Okay. And on the cross, and the favorite cross here, the Saint Damiano cross, right? Franciscan cross. On the cross, and this is a very beautiful image. I encourage everybody to get maybe one, right? Put inside your prayer space, okay, to identify yourself as Franciscan. Okay, I have a few. If you need, and let me know. Okay. Right. So on the cross, God is not possessing. There's no sense of possessiveness, right? Represented here. He's fully communicating his love in radical openness, right? The way that he's put his hands out like that is radical openness and acceptance of the human person. Not only is he accepting, where he's going, which is to be crucified on the cross, he's also accepting all of our sin, right? He's accepting us as people to come and sit at the foot of the cross, right? There's a lot of ways that we can interpret that, but there's no element of possessiveness here, right? He's not trying to possess anything. He's not clinging onto anything. He's actually radically dependent on his Father, right? His Father said that this is the path that you must walk, you must be crucified. And he said that, I will accept, right, what my Father wants me to do, and this is where he is, right? So radical openness and acceptance of the human person. And there's a lot of weakness here. We might think there's a lot of weakness here, right, demonstrated on this cross, but there's also a lot of power, right? He's showing that, hey, for me, my radical openness and acceptance has allowed me to conquer the biggest things of all, right? Sin and death, right? That's what he's representing here. On the cross, something that we might want to reflect also as we are in this season of Lent. So Francis, right, didn't write about destitution, and this is another big Franciscan idea. I will not try to pronounce, okay, the red words in the brackets, okay, but just need to know that that is the same as destitution, okay. He wrote about living without anything of one's own. I think a lot of the time we actually hear this idea. I think this is the word that I can maybe pronounce. Sine proprio.
Sine proprio.
Yes, Fry JP pronounced it the same way. Sine proprio, yes. Okay. So yes, living without anything of one's own, right? So basically we're not clinging to all of these material possessions. He didn't talk about destitution, right? Destitution is like, is living in a very a state of want, of need, or just living without anything of one's own. So how do you do that? Right? For Franciscans, it's about being open, right, to the generosity of others, being dependent on the world around you, right, and all of the goodness that is already there. But sometimes we don't even know that we need the help, and people give us the help, and we're like, oh, where does that come from? Hello, like where does it come from? God and flesh in other people. Okay, God and flesh in other people. Sometimes you're like, oh, where did this help came from? I still don't know. It dropped from the sky. Didn't drop from the sky. It's God and flesh in other people.
So maybe the word sine rebus huius mundi is without the things of the world, right?
Oh.
And sine proprio is without appropriating, like possessing.
That's right. That's right, JP. That's right,
So
yes.
Like we have always said, the Franciscans, we don't take the vow of poverty, but we say we do not appropriate, vow of non-appropriation. It means we can legally own, but we don't claim, we don't possess. So we share it. We learn to share with one another. Yeah. So for Francis, why we learn to share? Because God is the only one that is, He's the giver. All right. And we are not, we don't own it, we just receive it. So in that spirit of sine proprio, we learn to share. Make sense?
I hope everybody on the Zoom call has listened to the words of Fry JP. Fry JP. No. Make sure that you're getting all the good stuff, okay? Later or not, we can have Fry JP say one more time, okay? For folks Zoom. Okay. And I think this is leading me to some of my concluding thoughts really, okay, about this chapter, which is where Francis placed this idea of poverty, okay, in this bigger scheme of things. All right, so he talked about these three areas: poverty with our inner selves, poverty in our relations with others, and poverty in our relations with God. So we'll just look at some brief examples what these three ideas mean. Okay, so but he placed poverty in these three frames of thinking. Okay, our inner selves, our relations with others, people around us, and our relations with God. So don't worry, the 3 points will come up again. So what does it mean to have poverty in terms of my inner self? It means that I don't cling to the gifts that God has given me, right? So I'm just going to accumulate and say, oh, I'm really good at this, but I'm going to keep it to myself. Right? I'm just going to keep it to myself, keep it where it's safe. It's self-preoccupation, right? Also to some extent, right? We cling to the gifts that God has given us instead of sharing it actively with other people, right? And the world around us. They say, oh yeah, God, made me really good at doing this particular thing, right? And instead of like enriching others, sharing it with other people, I'm very self-preoccupied, right? I'm just occupied with my own, my own glorification, the fact that it's about self-exaltation, right? Sin, it's about self-exalting, right? So this is the struggle a lot of us sometimes face, right? It's clinging on to the gifts that God has given us, and the same vocabulary keeps coming out: clinging, grasping, grabbing, right? But that's not where we ideally want to be, right? We want to live a free, right, life radically dependent on God's love. So how about our relations with others? So think about it when you're angry with someone, angry with your friend, what are you clinging on to? All that anger, that unhappiness, right? We cling to our anger, we cling to the past, instead of living in the present. Right, and I think Anne's image display picture is let go and let God, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, it's so hard to let go. Jesus, help me. And like sometimes we just need to keep saying it. We need to have people to keep us accountable that no, we are not defined by our anger, anger is an emotion, right? It's an appropriate response, but we don't have to cling on to it, right, for too long. We need to let it dissipate, right? We don't have to cling on to the past. Sometimes God is asking us to live in the present, the here and now, where we find ourselves in. Okay, and this just leads me to a short segue, right, about just a few ideas about the human will, because it's been discussed, I think, last year also in the other book that Ilia Delio talks about, Franciscan Prayer. What is our human will? We realize that the human will is a source of free choice, right? We are given autonomy to decide what we want to do. You might think that, oh, we're just puppets, being pulled on strings, but no, we have free will. We are able to choose consciously what we want to do. And it's also a very vulnerable place, right? Human will is also very vulnerable. It's a place of freedom where we exercise our free will, right? It allows us to attain freedom. But unfortunately, on the flip side, it's also a root of sin because it also allows us to choose the not so good things, right? We can choose the not so good things and we can choose the better path, but ultimately, we are able to make this decision now. Okay. So what is obedience? And I find obedience quite an interesting idea because if you think about the fact that we're living through Lent, right? Obedience is demonstrated by the Lamb of God. Obedience is not hierarchy of order. Sometimes we think that's what obedience is, right? Oh, I'm obedient, like, to this person, right? Or to this person who is on a higher, rank, right? In this hierarchy, right? I'm obedient to this person, right? I'm demanding this person to do my will, right? So this person is obedient to what I want him or her to do. But obedience in our sense, where we are looking at it, is a relationship of neutrality where I am obedient out of love, right? Out of love for this person, I'm obedient unto his will. The same way Jesus is obedient unto the will of his Father. But he didn't say, oh, because, right, my Father is demanding me to do this thing, therefore I decide to go and walk this path and go to Calvary. He said, no, I love you. Right? And power of love is the thing that will overrule more than, okay, the power of self-will. Because if I were ruled by my power of self-will, I probably won't be obedient, right? And the second point is giving oneself to the other out of love, self-give, right? I'm obedient such that I want to give myself fully, right, to another out of love. Remember the Ramon Lau, the Spanish mystic who Raymond Lau, whose only answer to every question is like LOVE, a capital L, right? But we know that he's hitting some good points there. Okay? It's not that he has got limited vocabulary, right? It's just that that's how he wants to express his answer to all these questions. Okay. And this is just the last part, okay, about the idea of poverty. Our relations with God, and that comes from the previous slide about free will, okay, and obedience. To be obedient means to respect and desire the best for the other, and it helps us to restore our fallen, sometimes it's disordered, right? Our self-will gets disordered, and it directs us to the right direction, which is the will of God. And what is the will of God? The will of God is not like some, he's trying to make us very unhappy, or put us in a particular situation. Actually, the will of God is his love for us. He wants to align, right, our will with his love, and that's when we start to feel free, right? We don't feel like we're struggling against something, right? Like we're struggling against some kind of invisible current. It's not about struggling against, it's about moving closer and closer into this greater alignment. Right? We're trying to attain greater alignment. And sometimes, unfortunately, where we might find ourselves right now in Lent is very misaligned. And it's okay. It's okay to be misaligned. I think the important thing is to be aware of where we are and how we're feeling at this point, and pray for the grace to align our will with his. Okay, so a lot of ideas here, right? But maybe something that touches you, you can just write down. Okay, so there's some concluding idea really. Obedience as the fruit of poverty. So this is sort of like an overarching idea really. Obedience as the fruit of poverty manifests itself in the right relationship in community, because poverty is relational. It's about how I interact with the other person, the relatedness that I share with this person, right? Obedience is the fruit of poverty, okay, knowing that I don't really have anything, right? And therefore I'm radically dependent and I'm obedient to the will, right, of the one that loves me. Okay. And I think this one we are quite clear about this idea, but as you know, teacher must bring back the main idea towards the end of the slide, right? When we are in need, we are dependent on others. So just if you want to take away some central idea, when we are in need, that gives rise to dependence, right? It could be dependence on others, could be dependence on God. We have looked at it, I think, in a few different ways. Okay. And this is a very interesting sentence that Ilia Delio had in the book, where basically what God is trying to tell us is, I need you. Need you as in each of us as individuals. I need you, your gifts, your goodness, your ideas, and your help. He wants us to share, right, all of these things with the people, right, around us. He didn't say, oh, I give you this thing, and then you go and bury it under, right, like the table or something. No, right? No, he's not asking us to do that. He's asking us to be lights, right, salt of the earth, right? So we are trying to share our gifts, our goodness, and our ideas with other people. And think of it as like God is personally telling you this. What would you say? How will you respond to this call from him? So this really leads me to my tail end already. All we have is gift. We are inherently poor people, right? All that we have, the fact that we are here, is just God's gracious love. It's just his gift. Right? And St. Clare has to come towards the end of the presentation because she is in the title of the book, right? St. Clare of Assisi. She has to make another appearance, right? We can't not have her, make her appearance. St. Clare believed in a God enfleshed in this fragile human nature. She's here, right? The incarnation, right? The fact that God is with us. God has decided to take on our lowly human form to be with us, right? So it's the best representation, right, of poverty. Okay, and the pathway to God is through poverty. The pathway to God is not through filling our hearts, minds, and wills with a lot of things, but through poverty, where in our vulnerability and weakness, God can enter in. I think this one is something that we need to let it sink in, right, before I go to the reflection question. But this is like my concluding thoughts, really. The pathway to God is through poverty. This is the entire crux of chapter 2, right? Poverty. Where in our vulnerability, right, we need to make ourselves vulnerable. When we are weak, right, we become dependent. And that's when we open the window. Right? We open the window, open, receptive, God can enter in. And of course, we can also enter into the lives of others. Okay, so I think this is a really big thought. And I had to put St. Clare there, right? Okay. I need to put St. Clare there because this is a book about St. Clare. Okay. So here we go. I'm done for today, taking you through this idea. And just want to leave these 4 reflection questions here. Okay, so yep. Okay, that's all. I think then we'll just maybe have a short 5-minute break. Yeah.